So welcome everyone to Democracy 3.0. Our goal as an organization is to innovate collaborative democratic processes, which allow us to move from a number of separate individuals with different opinions, beliefs, and values, um, and come to a open and inclusive consensus that everyone is okay with, and that a group can move forward together with. Um, so that's what we are. And it's perfect that you guys were talking about UBI and inflation, if I heard correctly, because I was thinking that lately we've had fairly small groups, and I want to um, sort of challenge ourselves um, to experiment with and grow these democratic processes. Um, and a lot of people in our group agree on a lot of stuff, and I think I want us to challenge ourselves and try and find something that we disagree about. And I've been thinking this week about the structure of how this process should work. And one thing that I've been thinking is that, if you look at the core human values, that things that everybody values in and of itself, I think there are core human values like truth, beauty, um, happiness, security, things like this, which I think pretty much everyone is agrees with. Maybe some people value one value more than another. There be slight differences in relative priority, but I think everybody's pretty much in agreement with the really core things. And so, if that's true, I think that a lot of what happens is that you know maybe you are in favor of truth, but then the question becomes, if you're in favor of truth, then what does that mean about your decisions? Like, what, in order to arrive to the truth, then what are the things that you do? And and there's sort of like a spectrum, and at the very top is very specific, very detailed, um say decisions perhaps, and then at the very bottom are these abstract values. And I think that the disagreements, many of them, maybe all of them, maybe many of them, are really disagreements about reality. They're really about maybe you and I both agree that truth is good, but maybe I think that this process is better for getting to the truth, and you think that some other process is better for getting to the truth. And I guess what would be, maybe that means that a good way to do it is that we have to somehow figure out how to get everybody on the same page, more or less, with reality, to the degree that it can be done. So the UBI and inflation thing is wonderful. If we didn't talk about that, I was going to propose we talk about a very controversial topic, which is Ukraine. But UBI and inflation would be great. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Brian, would you like to restate your position?
Sorry.
I'm saying to Brian if he wants to restate his position on
Yeah.
UBI.
I lost track. My position, what's my position?
I
That,
think we're talking about
The,
inflation,
the,
Brian.
the pro the pro UBI and everything we
Yeah.
were talking about.
yeah, your objection to UBI was that it could lead to inflation. Um, and I guess my response was, if that's true, then any increase in wages, any increase in disposable income to the people on the bottom of the economic ladder, then would result in inflation as well. So that there's no,
Yeah,
so
and I
that's
agree
not
with you.
so that, well,
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I don't, yeah, but that's what I'm saying is I don't agree that is an issue. And especially it's less an issue with universal basic income because
Are you saying that rise increase in wages doesn't cause inflation?
I would say not necessarily. Nissan, I think it's really
I-
interesting that you talked about overproduction because I completely agree with you on that. Brian and I actually have done like a YouTube channel for a year or two talking about these UBI economics issues. But I totally agree that that's one of the core, aspects of my thinking is that we have a situation of overproduction, or you could say underutilization. I like to call it underutilization because it's like it's not necessarily a bad thing to produce a lot of stuff, as long as you're not, you're doing it in like environmentally responsible way. Um, but the bad thing is that you could produce so much products and services, but then you have all these people and you don't give them access to what you could actually produce. And that's silly, and it has a lot of bad second order effects. It causes stagnant wages. It causes asset bubbles. But it so yeah, I I think I love that you said that.
Yeah, so yeah, I also look at it as a very real inefficiency in the system as we lose 34 to 64% in production and waste that we distribute from depending if you're a third world country or a first world country. I mean, it's ridiculous. In fact, the amount of good stuff that we throw out, and even here in New York, they would intentionally destroy good product. Like stores will throw out, good stock and then bleach it,
Yep.
and to make sure that the homeless people can't even use it to
Yeah.
maintain their price margin.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, so just again to restate my position. My position is that I'm fair for a UBI system, but I find a problem in our system is that the way capitalism is formed, it is done in a way that the tautology, the ideology that believe that what would happen is more consumption would lead to more production. And that didn't technically happen because our technology has advanced our production far greater than anything would ever be anticipated. To now we have an overproduction of stuff and not enough demand, and more than we could supply. So due to that, capitalists, there's nothing stopping stores and stuff from just jacking up prices because they don't need no need for more stock. In fact, they'll just dump extra stock because they have too much. That's happened in the farms where they had to dump, was it hot dogs? That was hot dogs and hamburgers.
Milk,
Corn,
potato,
corn. They
potatoes, I
just
think.
threw
Yeah.
yeah, potatoes. They
Yeah.
just threw tons and tons of that in the ditch because they couldn't actually do anything with them. So that in itself is an efficiency.
Yeah. And
So yeah,
to me that is, I mean, that's absolutely, the reason that happens is that the system does not give everybody access to those things. So there are people who need um, food, all those things that they're throwing out, and they're not allowed to get them, because the system doesn't provide,
yeah.
you
I'll
know
go one step further. I'll say they actively deny access. I mean, in New York, there were literally, and I mean this literally, for every one homeless person, there are 6 empty apartments.
Yep.
That's a true statement.
These are,
So
I write articles about these. These are all the things I love that you're talking about this.
yeah.
Yeah.
So and the reason why, so they clear out the homeless. The solution is not to give homeless people homes, but to throw homeless people out because it devaluates the property value for having homeless people around the area. So if they build up projects or something like that, that devalues the product, and the homes are only used as basically a tax haven in New York City. So they want to keep the valuation high because they keep it in assets so they could defer the assets away as a way of dodging taxes.
So
So
Nissan, let me ask you if I can. So if you gave the homeless people universal basic income and then they had that income attached to them and they could go live in a part of the country where it was more affordable than New York City, wouldn't that as wouldn't that bring down the price of housing in New York City as people moved out?
no, that would not, because
Would-
it's area dependent. because the problem also is that there's a legal structure you have to get by when you have to do construction homes. So what we're having right now is a suburbia we have that we could actually build bigger houses, but because of the laws, because we have sectioning of houses, so most of the section houses are only for one family houses. So there's less of space because you're only allowed to build one family homes per lot. So the same thing also occurs in other areas. So even you go live in a cheaper area, the value is still going to be devaluated. And it's because the valuation comes from the space that's surrounding it, of the commerce over here. So if they go somewhere else, that's better for New York, the rich people of New York anyway, because it just brings the valuation up higher. They want them to leave, but giving them money was not going to allow them just to go and leave though, because the reason why is like, because you're homeless, you have no bank account, you have no way of actually getting the money to the homeless person, which that's a whole nother can of worms.
Well, so, I mean, Eddie told you why he does these meetings, but the reason I'm here is to promote the American Union and the specific legislative solutions for 2022, which would set every American up with a treasury account. So bring everybody into the banking system and deposit $1,300 a month.
I would
adults.
say the problem with that is that I mean, a good idea theory, but the problem I have is the banking system in and of itself.
Right, and so that's what the go ahead.
Sorry, I'm saying if your idea is also to move it to Franklin's idea, which was to turn the post office into like public banks, I'll be all for it for that. But I will not do it on a private bank system.
Yes, good. That's not what this is. This is the Treasury setting up essentially a public payment infrastructure. So everyone has their own bank accounts. If you like your bank, you can keep it, but now you've got a free public option for banking, and which includes postal banking as well. So it basically, what's that?
You actually have to go through the Treasury to do that? I don't think that needs to be done through Treasury. I think that could be done through executive order.
Well, the reason that we're going through the Treasury is because that's the way that we pay out the universal basic income, is by having the Treasury set up accounts to distribute a central bank digital currency with.
I know, but I don't think the actual line of attack is the Treasury itself. You have to want to force the Treasury to do something, but you don't go to the Treasury yourself. You have to go there through I think it's the presidential executive branch that handles that.
There's a political decision, and the Treasury is the organization that might be set up to do the operations, but there's a political decision,
yes,
which is definitely not the Treasury's decision.
That's correct.
It's like, maybe like Congress could do it.
Probably. Yeah, I don't think changing the Treasury is going to fix that problem. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. Right. So this is the legislative package. Oh, here, Eddie, I got it for you. In the legislative package, Congress would enact this policy so that the Treasury would bring everyone in the banking system, pay them a regular amount of money, because Nissan, like you identified, this gap between the amount of stuff that we produce and then the amount of money circulating to buy it, and that they're not equal. So the universal basic income fills that structural gap, where right now we're borrowing it to fill it.
Well, that was done on purpose. It was purposely done. That's why we're a debt-based society. It's not a fault. It's a feature.
I know, which is why this is a better system, because
I'm not arguing it's not a better system. I'm not arguing that's a better system.
Yeah, but yes,
I think the core question here is like, from the perspective of reality testing, if we set up a UBI, what would happen? I'm convinced many very good things would happen. Nissan,
we know from studies the first thing that goes is debt. As far as all the small testing that has been tried, overwhelmingly, the first thing that has been done is people taking care of their financial abilities and paying off their debt. The second thing that would happen is actually people going back to school. That's the second most common thing they found when instituting the UBI on a small scale. Most people go actually take up more school, which is good because they want to get more money.
Yeah.
And the third thing that benefits was, you know, families like staying at home just for child leave. They don't just stay home. They just stay home only to extend the child leave. So, you know, there's a stronger bond between the parent and the child. So those those
Yeah,
those in order
those are
are
good.
what we know would
Yeah,
happen if you put a UBI into effect.
yeah,
But that meant, remember, the UBIs were very limited in scope.
yeah,
So this might have a different effect if done on a larger scale, because, you know, people
yeah.
aren't going to price gouge, you know, a small group of people that they don't know. You know,
Right.
if people knew that they had money to spend,
Yeah,
then that's when prices would collectively go up, because what companies do, they collectively bargain together, and instead of competing with each other, they work together to set prices higher and higher. That's the main issue we're having. We don't have that thing that creates that corporate, you know, challenge, that corporate game that's supposedly goes on in a free market system.
yeah.
And they're encouraged to do that because, again, they get subsidized by the government.
So we could take so I have some ideas about the inflation dynamics here, but we could take that as um, a hypothesis, and I would say that um, I would say that, people, I think that the people who are saying that this is because companies are raising prices, that's absolutely true. If you look at the corporations
We have
themselves,
proof of
they're
this.
talking about, yeah, they're talking about how much the profit margins are improving and the profits are going up. So I think it's really clear that the companies are raising prices, and profits are increasing, and that I think that it's clear that that is the direct cause. Now, I would suggest that, so a lot of people take that and then they say, you see it's because of corporate greed, and I would sort of disagree with that explanation as being a good explanation for what's happening, because if you say that it's because of corporate greed, I think it's too thin of an explanation, because corporate greed is there, this year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for the last 50 years. It's always been there. And so I think you have to ask, what is different between the situation now and the situation like for the past 30 years before the inflation started rising, because it was very low inflation for, from, 90s to 2019, I think. Yeah, 2019. And the
Yeah,
greed is the same in both situations. And so I think it needs another, it needs an explanation. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's more of an intrinsic item in feature in the system, because it's not, because they're being forced to like produce more and more to irrelevant, because the way they actually calculate and analyze their market. So
Yeah.
we rate the performance of a company based on their extended gains.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. And I have ideas about how that works, and why it is leading to inflation now. And so if you think about
that's a very complicated.
I
That
love
that that
complicated
that
stuff.
that'd be like a 5-hour conversation right there.
Yeah, this is why me and Brian, went on about this for 2 years. But I've I've thought about it for a long time. Maybe I can get it in a nutshell a bit. Let me give this a try. Um, if you think about what, like microeconomics, like what a business faces, one of the things that they face is like the elasticity of their demand. They face a certain demand curve. So, they could price the product at $15, $10, or $5. And they probably do a little research and a little experimenting, and figure out, what happens if if it's $5, $10, or $15. And the things that's going to happen is that the amount of quantity that they're going to be able to sell is going to be different. So some companies, like commodities company, if they're selling like wheat or apples, and there's lots of competition, and nobody cares like who sold them the apple or who made the apple. Like all apples are pretty much, they're the same thing. Nobody cares if they buy it from you or somebody else. Then those companies face a very elastic demand. So if they're like 10 cents higher than the other guy, everybody's going to say, I can get the same thing for 10 cents less. And so their prices tend to be very low. Profit margins tend to be low. On the other hand, if the demand curve is very elastic, so for like, luxury items like Mercedes, where the whole point is to have this $1 million Mercedes, sometimes then they'll find that, they could price it for $200,000 or they could price it for $1 million. And, for some luxury items like jewelry, sometimes they won't even sell as much at 200,000 as they will at $1 million, because the whole point was to buy something that is really expensive. So the elasticity of the demand curve, that determines what is going to maximize profit for the company. And I would argue that one thing that is happening, in the last,
A lot of background
recently,
noise.
in the last 40 years, in a progressive fashion, is that inequality has gotten higher and higher. And if you have very high inequality, then if you think about it, more and more products will come into a situation where it's like the people at the top, the top 20% of the economy, the people who have, higher incomes, they're going to be able to afford the product even if you raise the price 10%. And the bottom 80%, a lot of them will not be able to afford that product even if you don't raise the price. And so when companies face that type of a demand curve, then what happens is they find out what they've been telling us that they found out in the last year, is that when they raise the price 10%, like 10 years ago, they might have been scared that their quantity would go down. But recently they've been raising it, and they're finding that after they raise the price, they can still sell almost the same amount. And so that makes it super profitable to raise the price. And I would argue that that is the explanation for inflation rising in this era. And it has a lot to do with inequality. And I would argue that if you reduce inequality by sending out a UBI to everybody so that everybody has money to spend, that demand curve flattens out again, and the companies start finding that if they keep the prices low, there is 80% of the population who has a chance to maybe buy that product, and they could actually make more money by selling more of the product instead of selling the product at a higher price. So like when the Alaska dividends come out, every year, I understand that all the businesses locally, they have a huge sale because suddenly everybody's got money in their hands, and all the businesses want to compete and get that money as revenues for themselves. And so they actually take the prices down. And I would argue that a UBI would actually, I would argue that UBI is actually maybe the only solution to avoid having inflation get worse and worse in the current system, because the current system is misdesigned in different in lots of different ways. The main way being that the money from the Fed, the stimulus, including fiscal policy, all of that goes to the top of the economy instead of the bottom, and it just makes the situation worse and doesn't fix it. You have to redirect it to the bottom and give it to everybody, and that actually takes you out of those dynamics. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to take up all the time, but I have 3 things on this.
Yeah.
Before I say, anybody happy? Brian, you have anything to say? I don't want to.
I got my chili, so I'm happy listening. And I've heard Eddie talk about this a lot, so I really appreciate your perspective.
Okay.
I really do.
Okay, so the first thing I would have to say is, I do agree with you with the demand curve. That's definitely one factor. You definitely hit that. If we were to start the UBI thing, remember, it will take a long time for a transition over, because companies don't just transition over from their business model for like at least two fiscal cycles. You know, they tend to stay with, you know, their business model, right? So if you would see that, you're looking at another 5-10 years before you would see that flattening thing. I mean, you know, take effect. But and also, second of all, it is a poignant thing that people need to understand. Our currency, by design, is made to be inflationary. So the idea is to try to control what the Treasury tries is try to control the inflation, because the idea of inflation, of having inflationary currency, is to push the flow of money, because because the idea is, if you have inflation, then the money's being lost by saving it, so you're encouraged to spend the money. So it's important for a currency to have a type of inflation to encourage spending. That's another thing that you need to understand economically. With that, there's also shadow pricing that you're missing, where companies do a lot of research, but they not only alter the price of the product, they do little things to alter the content and quality of the product to get more out. Like, for example, adding 2 less chips inside a Dorito bag, you know, or slightly changing the size of a candy bar and still paying the same price. So it's a shadow increase in price, because you don't see the price of the product change. You're seeing the product itself change. So that's another area you gotta look at. So the problem still remains is not just the money, it's also the power behind the money. And I totally agree with you that the way our system's set up is set to circulate up and pull up in certain areas, mostly in corporate areas. It pulls up, and as corporations take that money, hold it, and take it out of circulation, which is not good. It's not being taxed back regularly, which is supposed to be the way that we control inflation, by it going back to the government to be burnt out through taxation. That does not happen. So yeah, you're totally hitting that palm on the head. And the reason why that is because there is no structural mechanism that actually gives the power to the government to actually regulate the companies to force that to happen. And that's because there's a lot of legal things that goes with jurisdiction and all this other stuff that, you know, it takes a lot to understand for me to explain the rest of it. And I'm not gonna give a whole lecture here.
Yeah, I do that. I'm like, okay, I gotta stop now. Never stop.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's just
Yeah.
crazy the way things are set up.
So Nissan, I think that's a pretty good take on things. I think our view of the truth is pretty similar. And so I'd argue that since if we want our currency to be inflationary, to encourage people to spend and so on and so forth, the way to do that is to add that money at the bottom. So however much money you're adding, everybody should get an equal share, and that universal basic income is the way to do that, as opposed to what we do now, which is borrowing it into existence at the top and then hoping it trickles down. So to the extent that inflation is an issue, essentially universal basic income makes it a hold harmless for the first, for your first whatever purchasing power that you lose.
Unless you hit hyperinflation, which that becomes a problem.
So I think that that's a really standard classic framing in economics, is that there's this idea that inflation and growth are like, you sort of have to like balance the needs. And if you have like too little stimulus, then you won't get the economic growth, and then if you have too much, then you'll get the inflation. And I would actually argue that is not that's not always true. and that the thing that is missing there is that you have to look at um, what the level of utilization is, and how much productive capacity you have. So we just talked about, I think we agree that we're at underutilization. There's lots of productive capacity that's not being used. And so I'd argue that in this situation, when provide money to the consumer, and allow more economic growth to happen, there's actually a ton of space. I'd say there's trillions of dollars in the U.S. economy that you could have more. I would say U.S. economy productive capacity is about 30 trillion, and you could have $7 trillion more of goods and services going out to everybody equally, due to UBI, without getting to what I would call type 1 inflation. Type 1 inflation is that when you start getting, if it's 30 trillion capacity and you start to get above that amount in spending, and so you're sending out too much UBI, and people are trying to spend like 35 trillion, but there's only enough factories and companies, and there's only enough capacity to actually do $30 trillion of real goods and services. Then in that situation, you do have type 1 inflation. And companies find that because their capacity is full out, and they can't actually increase their quantity when they hit that ceiling, then they find that the most rational thing for them to do is to raise prices, because they can't supply everybody anyway. So they might as well raise the prices and supply, like, say, the 9 out of 10 people who give them the best prices. That's type 1 inflation. And I think that we are very, very far from that happening. And I think that it's a standard thought that most people, most economists, think that, and they're wrong about that in this situation.
My actual thought on this is one vector that hasn't been discussed very much is the movement to servicing industry. And the fact is, money cannot is being less able to generate wealth, especially the poor you get, more expensive things become, because you're not allowed to actually own anything. Things are sold to you piecemeal, and things are turned into services that you constantly pay for instead of something that you own. So this, I guess, I believe it was Warren Buffett that said this in the Great Reset: you will own nothing and you wouldn't like it. I think
Yeah, I think
that's what.
people are saying the World Economic Forum or something like that. The
Yeah,
WEF. I don't think I don't think it's Buffett. I think it's the WEF.
I
So
don't remember who made
that's
that quote, but
that's funny, because I agree with you so much about that. I think that the key to the reason that overall society is way more prosperous than we were, um, you know 200 years ago. We're doing this silly thing where we're leaving the bottom behind and not giving them any of the prosperity, but generally we're much more prosperous than 200 years ago. And the key, probably the only reason that is true, is because of productive capital, because of technology, because they made it an automated weaving frame, where before one weaver could only make this much production, and then now, with the addition of technology and a certain amount of capital, productive capital, as in the frame itself, suddenly that production goes way up. That's the key to prosperity, and it's absolutely, ownership of that capital is key. And we should aim for a situation where everybody owns capital. I think that the best version of socialism is where everyone is a capitalist. But
yeah,
UBI is like sort of halfway there. UBI would be very helpful, because the capital that's not being productive would then go to everybody. And then I actually think you should do financial education, and get everybody, make this just sort of like every American knows about freedom. Every American should also know that the way to prosperity is capital ownership.
Okay, there was a couple of things there. One, I'm just gonna say this off the head because as you were speaking, brought this up with everybody being a capitalist. This comes back to an argument I heard Vosh make on his channel. It kind of did it jokingly, but kind of made sense. Of arguing, the cosmetic. What's the idea of what we actually get? So instead of offering socialism, what we do is market it as super capitalism, where everybody's a capitalist. So it just made me think of that, which was interesting in thought. So I'm like, yeah. I mean, I originally thought that we would have some type of techno sociocracy where everybody get to own a robot, a labor robot, and you would
Yeah,
generate income from whatever that
yeah,
machine does.
yeah,
I mean, that kind of started happening with Bitcoin. If you notice, when miners started buying and making their own mining machines, and then that made the money for them. So that right there, I thought was like a real good beginning. That's why I'm like eye open about that, like how that would work. But the only issue still kind of running into is how we actually get that actual power and ability back in the right order, because the the problem is we don't have like I said, we don't have the actual ownership. We don't have any of the means and structurally. So you have to change in the structure how we produce the means and distribute this power,
yeah,
which is still, I mean, the idea of doing market socialism, which is cooperatives, a distributionary system,
yeah. Well, I
that's
mean,
still being explored. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, money is power. So I think a UBI would be huge. I mean, and in a very real way in terms of, um, I think that a lot of people are sort of struggling just to survive, and they don't have the space and the capacity to be worried about politics. And if you get it to a place where everybody is basically secure and they're not worried about becoming homeless or not being able to feed their family, I think that they would have a lot more space for organizing, I guess. And there's an idea that's been floated of like democracy dollars and giving out everybody a certain amount of money which they can use only for donating to political candidates or movements or causes or whatever. And I would point out that like there's a lot of corporate money in politics, and that's very bad, but it's relatively, if you look at the numbers, if you give like $100 to every single one of the 300 million, or through, I don't know, maybe it's 400 million now people in the US, that's 30-40 billion dollars. And that is actually greater than the amount of corporate political spending is my understanding. So it's not necessarily that hard to flood out that money. It's a little bit like GameStop. $10 or $100 from every single American adds up to a large amount, and it could be quite significant.
But we already have too much political advertising as it is with the amount that's there. If we quadruple it, it's not going to improve the quality. It's just going to be a lot more quantity. And because large portions of that are going to go to, extremists on both sides. And they're just going to, I don't know. I get the idea behind democracy dollars, but I'm not persuaded that the answer to too much political spending is 5 times as much spending.
How are you relating
Yeah.
the political advertising to the democracy dollars, though? That because sending money to the people versus say corporations or certain groups having lots of money to use to advertise to people.
Because they
different.
donate the money to candidates, And then, as a former New Hampshire resident, during the 1 year of the the presidential primary, like every other commercial is a political advertising. That's how Tom Steyer, spent millions or billion, I don't know how much he spent, millions and millions of dollars buying up YouTube ads that
Yeah.
my kids were so sick of seeing Tom Steyer's face every time they watch something on YouTube.
Yeah.
And if you throw 5 times as much, you're going to see inflation in the price of these ads, which is going to be really good for the media companies. But I'm not sure it's going to produce a more informed electorate.
It'd probably be good for ad sellers, but the difference in the two situations is that right now the way it works is that advertising is very important. And so politicians are very beholden to the people who can give them large amounts of money to spend on that advertising for that reason. But if you're flooding the system with money in the hands of the individual voters, and that is a larger factor than the money coming from, I guess, the wealthy or the corporations, then that would probably change the calculus of politicians. That it would, I think someone like Bernie Sanders would probably do really well if
But
there was an extra $100 in every single person's hands that
I
they
mean,
could donate.
it's a possibility, but another possibility is you're going to see more clickbaity stunts and things like that to get people's attention and making these outrageous tweets and accusations and all sorts of things by politicians in order to get attention and get those donations. Right? Who was the guy, the congressman who yelled out "You lie" at Obama's State of the Union thing, and then he had his best fundraising quarter ever. And so, I mean, that's a real possibility.
Yeah. It might be. I don't know if that. I don't see a reason why that would be exacerbated by money being in the hands of the people instead of corporations. I mean that is definitely sort of a problem in politics, with the all sorts of crazy stuff. But I don't see that would become worse because of money in the hands of the people rather than corporations for political purposes, political money.
I feel like it could encourage clickbait politician stuff. So anyways, that's my thought.
What I would say is this would be a good time to look at the new NY City coin, the new city coins that are going to be in Miami and New York City, as cities start to have their own economy with their own currency. This might actually impact because there's actually crypto that's attempting to do such a thing, to create certain currency specifically for certain products and stuff like that. And I believe this will go into politics too. So on a local level, I would like to see, I think this is good to see tested in the local area. On a second note, I know I've probably been looking at as an anti UBI guy, but I actually want to make this one of the strongest arguments I think I can make for UBI is that in this technological time when money's digital, I don't see a really problem with hyperinflation. Hyperinflation was a problem back in the day because you had to wheel, cart, bow loads of money, because paper's heavy. But our money right now is completely digital, and it's digital is weightless. So I don't think increasing. So if everybody's a millionaire and everybody could go to the store and just pay $1 million for like a panty bar, I mean, really doesn't matter. It's relative at that point. That's the idea of relative money distribution.
The relative distributions is what's important, and I think that's the core point. The point is that the distribution is messed up, and that doesn't work for a functioning economy. And you got to change the distribution where people at the bottom are getting it. TC, you've been really quiet.
Yeah, TC, got any thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, it sounds really complicated, and usually complicated. I tend to want to think simple, and So I'm kind of left out of this conversation because it's like, there's too many moving pieces in it. There's too many counter forces, inflation, deflation, hyperinflation. And I'm just sitting here thinking that the change begins inside me, to be willing to be open to these conversations. So anyway, I woke up.
TC, you,
Yeah.
you hopped in a bit later. So I mean, for this meeting, I've been thinking that the core human values are pretty much the same, and that disagreements come out of different ideas about reality. And if people disagree on policy, generally it's a disagreement about what would happen if you put the policy in place, rather than the very base level of we want people to be happy and secure and prosperous, I guess.
Yes. Well, that's what I want. It's what I got.
Because of the Social Security.
Yeah,
Because of
I
your
mean,
UBI for retired people.
I think everybody should have Social Security. I mean, I think Social Security. As Brian says, we have safety nets, but they're nets. They're, there's more goes out than stays in.
They don't work.
And
Yeah.
what Sass made a great point the other day. He said, if they weren't means tested, they wouldn't keep inventing more of them. If they worked, they wouldn't keep inventing more of them. So, or something. It was brilliant, but I missed it. So excuse me.
Yeah. Well, that's why we should market UBI as Social Security for all. That's been proposed by Kyle Kalinske. I think that's a very poignant way of looking at it.
Nissan, are you gonna? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was wondering, are you gonna be at the UPA, the Economic Circle? I think it's tomorrow, Friday night in the US.
I don't know, because I gotta work then.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to make the meeting.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Oh, I could really get lost there.
Yeah.
Can I go back to something Nissan said a minute ago about cities starting their own coins and things like that? Because
Yes.
that reminds me of the situation that the United States was in, like in the 1800s and such, when local currencies, there just wasn't enough money circulating. And so they'd print their own money just to get more money circulating in the economy. And so if cities are doing this now, then I think it just drives home the point that there is not enough money circulating to support the economy. And so
Yeah,
again,
that's been there for a few years. It's been like that for the top economist said this already. What's his name? Then I'm sorry, the name escapes me. It was on Bloomberg. I don't remember his name right now. Damn it. But he said that there's not enough money in the system circulating, it's choking to death.
Yeah, absolutely.
so
We're actually almost at time. So, does anybody have any final thoughts before we officially end the meeting? And then generally, you're welcome to hang out after the meeting also.
Thanks for having the meeting every week, Eddie. It's good. It's good for me.
Yeah.
I definitely enjoyed this
I enjoyed
meeting.
it. Yeah, I enjoyed it too. So thanks.
I enjoyed this too. And if you're interested in ending poverty, ending mass incarceration, and ending the endless wars, visit anamericanunion.com and help us collectively bargain for a better social contract.
And this has been Nissan representing the New York People's Assembly. And also I help out at the UPA.
Okay,
All right.
wonderful. Thanks to anybody who's listening, and see everyone next week.